Hi, I am Mike of Left Dice. This is the Kerbal Space Program. Okay, I am trying to do a mission. The mission in question is quite low down, I think. Science stage in place around Eve. I should do that. That's going to be a very, very easy one. But there is. I'm recovering someone from Minmus, and their gear. Here we go. So Stelielia and her wreckage from around the orbit of Minmus. So what this is my asteroid redirect mission. This is my asteroid redirect craft. And the only difference is I've put some parachutes. You can't see them under the fairing. I put some parachutes on. That's literally the only change I've made. I'm going to have to kind of hope that I don't really need a heat shield. I have a plan, which is to, once I've actually got the wreckage and I've got it back into Kerbal orbit, because this has so much delta V. It's got an enormous amount of delta V. It's designed to grab asteroids that were zipping through Kerban's sphere of influence and bring them back. And so I've got tons of delta V. So I should be able to get a small item from around Minmus and bring that back and have lots of delta V, maybe to even do a powered descent if need be. But because I don't want Stelielia to get died if that all goes wrong, I do have my single staged orbit thing, which I could just do a rendezvous with that and bring her down with that, and then try and bring the wreckage down separately. So let's go.
So the launch went pretty well. Once I remembered to turn the throttle up to full. Yeah. The only problem is the steering seemed to be very oversensitive. It would wobble a lot. It's like the stabilization was oversteering all the time. And I think it may have been the fins, because as soon as I dropped them, everything became a lot more stable. So what I might do next time is leave the fins off, turn them off, don't use them for steering at all, and just use the engine gimbal for steering. So nice launch, pretty flat. I mean, could have been better, could have been worse. Not a huge amount of delta V to equalize, so you know, pretty good. Pleased with that. So then, obviously, what I want to do is find the ascending node or the descending node. Can't remember which one, but basically get my inclination correct for going to Minmus. And somewhere around here I discovered something useful when I was I wanted to maneuver that up, but I didn't want to use my monopropellant, but I wanted to use the Werner engines that I had installed. And I just turned off the monopropellant tank, and that worked brilliantly. So there you go, that was the thing I learned to do, so I could use RCS without using my monopropellant, which I need for all sorts of other things. So now I'm just getting ready to do the transfer burn to Minmus, putting my solar panels out and all that kind of good stuff, and waiting for the maneuver node. And it all worked, you know, just fine and dandy. Nothing particularly interesting, reasonably long burn, as these things often are, when you're going all the way out to Minmus. But what was actually kind of irritating, you can see that I'm getting an encounter there, and I was even able to adjust it. But round about here, suddenly the game decided I wasn't getting an encounter anymore. Just slightly aggravating. So I had to do another burn, a correction burn, to get that. So I'm not quite sure what happened there. The game just kind of changed its mind over whether or not I was going to get an encounter at all, which could have gone a bit horribly wrong, to be perfectly honest. But you know, I managed to do, you know, it was a tiny adjustment, but I managed to get that, and so I am now getting an encounter. So I spent a little time here just waiting for it to change SOI, because I didn't want to fiddle with it again. I didn't want to risk fast forwarding time warping through the SOI change, because just doing a standard encounter and all of a sudden I was, losing my encounter. So circularizing, making an orbit that is parallel to the target orbit, as is my standard practice. I was noticing that I was kind of nearly got an encounter as it was. I possibly could have gotten an encounter right away had I been a bit more fiddly, but I decided not to. Just go with what I was going to do. Set up a standard, rendezvous pattern. Work out how many orbits ahead I'm going to have to go in order to, get the maneuver that goes from my orbit to their orbit at just the right time to catch up with the satellite. So, a lot of fiddling, a lot of playing with, going a little bit further, going a little bit further, going, inching it ahead. Same with the prograde and retrograde, and just fiddling with those amounts of details. That was me noticing that I got an Eve contract. I had a contract to do a high def scan of Eve, and that was it completing. So in the time it took me to get all the way to Minmus, that scan completed. So I've now got a high def scan of Eve under my belt. That's pretty neat. Now the burn went really wrong here, and I am not sure what I did wrong. It's possible that I just simply forgot to point myself at the maneuver node. That's entirely possible. That's what I did. So I had to give that up. That clearly wasn't going to work. So I have to redo the whole thing at this point, including an adjustment to get myself into the correct orbital plane, and then fiddling with my velocity. In that case, pretty much my prograde velocity, to get some kind of encounter after that. So I have to fiddle with that quite a bit. I just wonder if I just completely forgot to point myself at my maneuver node, because I was just going in some completely random other direction. And yeah, I eventually get it. And I'm now getting my rendezvous. And this bit went pretty smoothly. The only problem was I wasn't able to use the docking port alignment tool, which I really rather would have liked to have used, because I really wanted to have a nice lineup, have the thing directly on, aligned with the rest of my craft, so that I know that I can safely do maneuvers and not be thrusting off axis and all that kind of stuff. But you'll see me try and bring up the docking port alignment indicator probably around about now, actually. And you see it doesn't work, so I put it back down again. And I don't know whether it's because the claw does not count as a docking port, or whether or not that kind of research lab floating in space did not have a docking port. Either way, it didn't work. But I got there. There will be some problems caused by this later on. But at this moment, my problems are caused by the fact that I can't remember how to deorbit from Minmus, and I keep accidentally deleting the maneuver node. I'm not quite sure why I was doing that. And I also accidentally kept hitting the shift key and actually thrusting the engines, which was throwing me off again. But eventually I remembered how you deorbit, and I got myself a reasonable burn. A reasonable apoapsis, a reasonable periapsis around Kerbal. I think that was me losing the maneuver node again. I think this is the last time I do. I think this is the one I finally succeeded at. So now this is where my burn goes horribly, horribly wrong. And I could not work out why this was happening. You see everything's going very, very weird. And I finally worked out what the problem was, which is that when I docked, when I docked, the game decided that the piece of equipment with a Kerbal in it, which is the research lab, that was now the bit of the spacecraft that would determine where front was, which is completely out off axis to the actual rocket. So I had to go in and find the probe core and set that to be, control from here. Because otherwise, it had a completely ridiculous idea about which way that I was pointing to compared to the rocket, and where the maneuver node should be, and all that kind of stuff. Now, I've given myself a periapsis within the atmosphere. I'm deliberately doing aerobraking at this stage. And I wasn't particularly deep within the atmosphere at this point. Some strange graphics glitches going on there. I was wondering whether that was planet shine, but I don't think it was. Those looked a bit ugly. I'm not quite sure what happened there. So, I did some actual braking, well as aerobraking. I didn't want to spend too much delta V because I knew I was going to want to circularize later on. So I wanted to keep some delta V in hand. But I used some of my fuel to bring the apoapsis down. And I used a bit more here to bring my apoapsis to about 55 kilometers. So quite a ways in Kerban's atmosphere at this stage. Because I want to do quite a lot of aerobraking. Because I want to bring my apoapsis way, 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 way down. Because at the moment it's really quite high. Look at that, more graphics glitches. I actually turned off Planet Shine briefly to see if that would fix it, but it didn't seem to. So I don't know what's causing that. Possibly the fact that I've been playing for about 2 hours by this point. So this is where we start to do some aerobraking. This aerobraking is going to go on for a little while. Now I'm pointing retrograde, so I'm as much of the rocket as possible is in the way of the atmosphere, so that the lab section where our rescued Kerban lives is going to be out of the way of the fire as much as possible. I had time enough. This went on for so long. I had time to go get a drink of water. Now the thing about always pointing retrograde is that obviously you need to maneuver your ship every so often when you do this, and especially when you're fast forwarding around each time, there basically has to be a little burst of maneuvering right at the other end, just as it starts coming into the atmosphere and the time warp stops. There is a little burst of maneuvering required to get back around to pointing the right way. And as I was doing this, I was gradually becoming aware of the amount of monopropellant that was then being used each time I did this. So you saw a little burst of monoprop being used just then. And obviously this was beginning to be a bit of a concern because there was the thought of maybe I'm going to be needing to use that monopropellant when I am coming in for a final burn, or I might want to use that monopropellant if I send up a rescue craft. I might want to dock with something, and it might be useful to have monopropellant on the actual craft itself. Obviously, the thing coming up to rescue or refuel or whatever could have its own monoprop, but I was just getting a bit concerned with how low it was coming down. So I decided that this time I was going to end my time a bit early to give myself time to retrograde without RCS and see how that went. Which it seemed fine to begin with. Everything, so I was feeling pleased with myself. Until this started happening, and I started turning and spinning and going round, and it was all a bit mental. And I was trying to, maybe I need to point prograde instead of retrograde. Maybe, the big thing at the end is just too heavy, and so you can't point retrograde. You have to point the other way. But gradually, as I went round and round, I began to realize that just the whole thing was becoming massively unstable. It just tumbles. It doesn't settle one way or another. It just tumbles. So, and the SAS on its own, the reaction was just can't do anything. So I formed this idea of repositioning the satellite, and I deeply, deeply wish I hadn't done this because I somehow imparted a bunch of rotation onto the lab module when I detached. And it was also really difficult to get the claw to actually hook on. I suspect I was not quite hitting at quite the right angle, so the bit of the claw that counts in the game as being the attachment point wasn't making the contact I needed. I ended up using all my RCS and having to do it purely on the main thruster. I'm surprised I managed it at all, to be honest. So I did eventually get it, and the alignment is a bit better, but it wasn't enough to actually make it more stable. It was certainly was not worth losing all my RCS for. But I did manage to reattach. I did manage to do my final aerobraking run. Didn't burn up, and I'd finally gotten the apoapsis down to about 120 kilometers, which I decided was good enough, and that I would just circularize from there, have a 120 click orbit, and then arrange some kind of rescue, because 120 kilometers is close enough, it's near Kerbal orbit, close enough that I would be able to get something there to actually finish this mission off.
Okay, that is where I'm going to leave it. We have a reasonable orbit, 120 by 119, pretty close to circular. I was trying to be extra fiddly and get even more circular, but you know, pointless. So what I'm going to have to do now is I'm going to have to fetch Stelielia, either with my single-staged orbit or with just my standard rescue craft. Single-stage orbit will be slightly cheaper, but quite frankly, I've got tons of money. I've got over 6 million Kerbal bucks. I don't particularly mind doing that. So I think I'm going to try and rescue Stelielia and then think about just see if I can deorbit it without adding a heat shield. That's what I'm going to do. So thanks for watching. Please hit like and subscribe if you're enjoying these videos. Do find nearleftus.com. And until next time, reach for the stars and try and make sure you know where you're controlling your